I pulled into a nondescript motel just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the desert in a muted orange glow. The place had been the kind I'd passed dozens of times on long trips, the kind with a flickering neon sign that buzzed intermittently, a vacancy light that stuttered like it had been on for decades. The parking lot was mostly empty, cracked asphalt stained with oil and sand blown in from the surrounding plains. The building itself leaned slightly to one side, its stucco walls faded to a dull beige, the edges of the roofline curling with age. The air smelled sharp, a mixture of bleach and something sour beneath it, like damp carpet that had never fully dried. I parked my car and stepped out, feeling the hard, gritty asphalt under my shoes and hearing the distant hum of the highway behind me. The clerk's window slid open with a groan. He handed me a key card for room 5 without looking up, his movements deliberate but slow, almost mechanical. He warned me about the air conditioner, said it was a little loud, and that was it. No smile, no questions. I nodded, thanked him silently, and walked toward the room. The fluorescent light above the door flickered once, twice, before holding steady. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, like moisture trapped behind walls for decades. The carpet was threadbare, fraying at the edges, the color faded to an almost indistinguishable gray. I unlocked the door, and the room greeted me with the stale, antiseptic smell of bleach that seemed to seep from the walls. The air conditioner rattled immediately, its vibration humming through the floor and walls, but I shrugged it off. I'd slept in worse. The room was sparse. A bed with a thin, lumpy mattress, a nightstand with a cracked lamp, a dresser with a few drawers that stuck when pulled, and a small table with 2 chairs. The wallpaper had a faded floral pattern, peeling in places where the corners had been damp at some point. I unpacked my bag, placing clothes in the drawers, my toothbrush in the tiny bathroom with its cold, white tiles and stained grout. Everything seemed normal at first. The mundane normality of the room made the air conditioner's hum almost comforting, a background rhythm I could drown in. That's when I noticed the maintenance closet door. It wasn't locked, just slightly ajar, a narrow sliver of shadow showing the dark interior. Dust motes floated in the air where a sliver of light hit. There were footprints leading in, small and uneven, like a child's, but the size was deceptive, somehow deliberate. They started at the edge of the hallway, pressed lightly into the dust on the floor, and ended abruptly, as if whoever had left them had vanished. I stared at them for a long moment, my mind ticking through explanations. Staff sometimes entered rooms at odd hours for cleaning, but it didn't feel like that. Nothing about it did. I told myself I was imagining things. I sat on the bed for a while, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak from the floorboards, the building settling into the desert night. Outside, the wind stirred sand against the edges of the lot, scraping softly against the walls, a dry, hollow sound. I eventually fell asleep, though uneasily, the footprints in the dust still lingering in my mind. At 2:30 in the morning, I woke. The floorboards outside my door were creaking slowly, deliberately, as if someone was pacing. I held my breath, straining to hear. There was a pause, and then the sound shifted closer, a single, measured step followed by another. I reached for my phone, hoping to call the front desk, but there was no signal. The desert stretched around the motel in all directions, black and empty, and the idea of walking out to my car, miles away, was unthinkable. I stayed on the bed, rigid, listening to each creak, each tiny scrape that the floorboards offered. Minutes felt like hours. The pacing continued intermittently, sometimes stopping entirely, then starting again. I stared at the door, willing myself to ignore the noise, telling myself it was just the building settling, just an animal. But the rhythm was too human, too purposeful. There was a method to it, a repetition that made the imagination impossible to quiet. I could feel my heart beating in my ears, matching the timing of the steps outside. Around 3:15, I glanced toward the mirror across from the bed. Movement caught the corner of my eye, subtle but unmistakable. A shadow stood in the doorway, still and silent. My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard the door open. I didn't dare turn to look directly. The shadow remained there, solid enough to see the outline of a person. A child maybe, though I couldn't be certain. I felt trapped between the need to understand what I was seeing and the fear of confirming it. My body stiffened. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, the shadow receded, as though it had never been there. I didn't sleep again. I sat on the bed, listening to the silence punctuated by the occasional creak. I watched the clock crawl towards sunrise, my nerves fraying with every passing minute. When the first light began to leak through the thin curtains, I packed hurriedly. I didn't grab my backpack, didn't take the extra items from my nightstand. Everything felt secondary to leaving. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, half expecting to hear the soft patter of small footsteps behind me, but the hall was empty. I moved quickly to my car, the desert light bleaching the edges of the motel, making it look even more abandoned than it had in the dark. Driving away, the motel shrinking in my rearview mirror, I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings make strange noises. I had imagined the shadow, the footprints. My mind had been too tired, too jumpy. But even as I tried to convince myself, a nagging unease lingered. Later, on a whim, I took the same highway again, passing the motel in daylight. Room 5's window reflected the sun like every other room. There was no sign of anyone having stayed there, no indication the night had even happened. The air conditioner hummed faintly through the building, a low, constant vibration, but the footprints were gone. The hallway remained silent, empty, perfectly ordinary. I never returned. I still think about it sometimes, the small, deliberate footsteps, the shadow in the mirror, the feeling that someone or something had been in that room, watching, waiting, existing in the gaps of light and dust. The motel itself seemed harmless, the kind of place you dismiss on road trips. But for that night, Room 5 held a presence that made me feel utterly exposed, as though the normal rhythms of the world had paused just for me. I tell myself it was imagination. I tell myself I was tired, that the desert and the isolation did strange things to perception. But every time I drive past, even from a distance, I can't shake the sense that the room remembers, that it holds something from that night, waiting for the next person to ignore the small, subtle signs, to think the buzzing neon and bleach smell are all that matter. The rest, the quiet, deliberate movements, the unacknowledged presence, remain invisible to the casual observer, but impossible to forget once you've seen it. Even now, I can picture the footprints in the dust, the shadow in the doorway, the slow creak of floorboards outside my door. I can feel the air conditioner's vibration in my bones. And I know, with a clarity that unsettles me more than any imagined figure, that Room 5 has a memory of me, just as I have a memory of it, and neither of us will ever be able to forget that night. I stopped at the motel because I was too tired to keep driving. I had been on the road since before sunrise, hauling equipment back from a job site that ran late. The town sat off a two-lane highway surrounded by flat land and grain silos. The motel stood behind a closed gas station, its parking lot patched with oil stains and weeds pushing through cracks. The building was one long rectangle, 2 floors, exterior hallways, and staircases at both ends. Most of the lights were off. A few windows glowed dim yellow behind thin curtains. The room I got sat on the ground level near the far end. The door opened stiffly, dragging against the frame. Inside, the air smelled damp and sour, like old carpet and cleaning fluid. The bedspread had faded patterns. The desk lamp buzzed faintly. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the edge of the bed to take my boots off. The carpet felt uneven, soft in places, hard in others, as if something underneath had shifted over time. I noticed dark stains near the base of the wall that had soaked deep into the fibers. I washed my hands in the bathroom sink. The water took several seconds to warm. The mirror had spots that never came off. The vent above the toilet rattled when I turned the light on. Back in the main room, I set my phone on the desk and plugged it in. The outlet worked only if the cord bent a certain way. I lay down fully dressed, planning to rest for an hour before moving on. The first thing that pulled my attention was a dull thump from somewhere above the ceiling. It sounded like someone shifting weight, slow and careful. The motel had a second floor, so I assumed it was another guest. The noise stopped. I closed my eyes. Minutes later, I felt a vibration under my shoulder. The bed frame hummed lightly, then went still. I rolled onto my side and listened. The hum returned, steady, then faded. I thought of old wiring or pipes. The building looked like it had not been updated in decades. When I sat up again, I noticed the vent cover on the wall near the floor. It was larger than usual, rectangular, painted the same off-white as the wall. One screw sat crooked, not fully tightened. The vent slats angled downward, making the interior dark. I did not remember seeing it earlier. I leaned closer and smelled stale air mixed with dust. I lay back down. My body felt heavy, but my mind stayed alert. Another sound came from behind the wall, softer than before. It resembled fabric brushing against wood. The sound moved slowly from the head of the bed toward the bathroom wall. I waited for it to stop. It did not. The mattress shifted slightly beneath me. Not enough to feel like movement from another person, but enough to register. I pressed my palm flat and held still. The sound behind the wall paused. After a moment, it resumed, now closer to the vent. I got up and turned on the bathroom light, hoping brightness would settle my nerves. The flicker stayed for a second before stabilizing. The vent fan hummed unevenly. I shut the door and stood in the small space, listening. The sound behind the wall grew faint but did not vanish. When I returned to the main room, I noticed something new. The desk lamp cast a shadow across the carpet that did not look right. The shadow bent inward near the vent, as if the wall there was not flush. I knelt and pressed on the drywall. It flexed more than expected. I ran my fingers along the baseboard and felt a gap wide enough to slide a fingertip into. I should have left then. I did not. Fatigue made me careless. I told myself it was an old building with poor repairs. I moved the chair from the desk and set it near the vent. Standing on it, I looked down through the slats. The darkness inside did not look empty. I could see wood framing and something metallic running along the bottom. I also saw a faint reflection that disappeared when I shifted my head. I stepped down and backed away. My heart beat faster, steady and heavy. I scanned the room. The window remained locked. The door latch sat intact. Nothing else seemed disturbed. I grabbed my phone. The battery showed charging but stayed at the same percentage. Another vibration ran through the bed frame. This time it lasted longer. The sound behind the wall moved again, slow and deliberate. It traveled upward, toward the ceiling. I stood near the door, keys in hand. I listened. Above me, the ceiling tiles creaked softly. Dust fell from a seam near the light fixture. Something pressed against the tile, then released. The tile settled back into place. I left the room and walked the length of the exterior hallway. The motel remained quiet. No televisions glowed through curtains. No cars pulled in. At the end of the building, I found a door marked as maintenance storage. It sat slightly open. Inside, shelves held old paint cans and broken fixtures. The smell of mildew grew stronger. At the back of the room, a ladder leaned against the wall, leading up through an opening in the ceiling. I did not climb it. I stood there, staring at the dark square above. The sound from earlier came again, closer now, coming from above the hallway ceiling. The noise stopped when I stepped back. I returned to my room, keeping my eyes on the ceiling the entire time. Inside, the vent cover now sat at a different angle. One screw rested on the carpet below it. I picked it up. The metal felt warm. I did not touch the vent again. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Before opening it, I paused and listened. From behind the wall, I heard slow breathing, controlled, close enough to feel real. The breathing stopped when I moved. I opened the door and walked out without running. I loaded my bag into the car and drove to the highway without looking back. I did not stop until the sun began to rise and a larger town appeared. Later that day, after sleeping in my car, I searched for information about the motel. Records showed it had been cited multiple times for safety violations. Old inspection reports mentioned unauthorized structural modifications and concealed access spaces behind guest rooms. A local news article described an arrest from years earlier involving a maintenance worker who had been living inside crawlspaces between walls, accessing rooms through vents to watch guests. Charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. The motel changed owners and reopened without major renovation. The explanation settled everything into place. The uneven carpet hid cutouts. The flexible wall concealed a widened cavity. The vent offered sight and sound. The noises matched careful movement inside a tight space. The breathing came from someone who knew when to stay still. I reported what I experienced to the county office. They told me the property had since been shut down again after another complaint. I never returned to that highway. I still think about how close the wall had been to the bed, how little material separated me from someone who had prepared the space to remain unseen. The fear did not come from the idea of being watched. It came from knowing the structure itself had been shaped to allow it, and that I had been lying there while someone waited on the other side, close enough to hear my breath. I remember driving down that stretch of highway late in the evening, the kind of road where the streetlights were few and far between, and the dark pressed in from both sides like a weight. We had been on the road since morning, 3 of us packed into a beat-up sedan, looking for a place to crash after a long day of hiking and driving through the back roads of rural Pennsylvania. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving only the dull orange glow of distant towns and the faint streaks of clouds overhead. That's when we spotted the motel. It wasn't much. The building was low and rectangular, with a sagging roof and paint peeling off in long strips. The neon sign buzzed weakly, the word vacancy, flickering as though it couldn't make up its mind. The parking lot was cracked and littered with cigarette butts and dried leaves. The air smelled faintly of damp asphalt and oil. We slowed down and circled the lot, expecting no one to be there, and yet a light flickered in the lobby. That single light was enough to make us pull in. The lobby was cramped, the carpet worn thin in places, threadbare patches exposing the plywood beneath. The air smelled sharply of bleach and must, as though someone had tried to clean years of grime in a single sweep. Behind the counter, an old man sat hunched, his face pale under the fluorescent bulb, eyes half-lidded. He didn't move to greet us. He barely acknowledged our presence. We handed him cash and he passed back 3 keys, each with a small, chipped plastic tag. He said nothing about the rooms, the price, or anything else, and we didn't ask. There was a draft as we walked to the stairs. The place felt cold for fall, the kind of cold that seeps into your clothes and settles in your bones. Our room was at the far end of the 2nd floor. The hallway smelled of damp wood and something faintly sour. The door creaked as we opened it, revealing a space that was dimly lit by a single flickering ceiling light. The furniture was sparse and functional, though worn. The bedspread thin and stiff, a nightstand with a cracked drawer, a small desk with peeling veneer. The air smelled of damp wood and old carpet, slightly metallic. We unpacked our bags slowly, each of us acutely aware of the silence that filled the room. Outside the window, the parking lot was empty except for our car, headlights off, looking abandoned in the faint light from the lobby. Started around 1 in the morning. First, it was just faint scratching. One of us noticed it first, a soft noise from the walls, almost like nails dragging lightly over plaster. We joked about rats or squirrels trapped somewhere behind the walls, but the sound was rhythmic, precise, deliberate. It didn't move randomly like an animal. Tapped, paused, tapped again, almost like code. We tried to convince ourselves it was nothing, but the way it echoed in the small room made it impossible to ignore. We sat up on our beds, listening, eyes darting to the corners where shadows seemed to cling. The scratching grew louder over time, moving along the walls in patterns that made it hard to ignore. It never sounded like it was in the ceiling, and it never moved to the floor. It stayed at our level, traveling along the walls, stopping suddenly, then resuming as though it were watching us, waiting for a response. Outside, the light in the parking lot flickered intermittently, casting the shadow of a figure across the lot. It was tall and thin, disappearing each time the bulb sputtered. We didn't see anyone walk by, and yet the shadow was there, stretching and vanishing in the moments between the flickers. By 3 in the morning, Exhaustion had started to take hold, but fear kept us alert. One of my friends, the quiet one, said he saw eyes. At first, I didn't understand, but then he pointed to the corner of the ceiling. There were two small reflective dots, like a pair of tiny lights staring at us. They didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. I scanned the room carefully. Nothing. No sign of any animal, no wires, no reflective object. Just the dots, unblinking, watching. None of us wanted to move, afraid of confirming what it might be. We slept in shifts. One of us would lie down while the other two stayed awake, listening to the tapping and the faint scratching, eyes fixed on the ceiling or the shadows outside. Every time the light flickered, the shadow reappeared, just for a moment, then gone. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a trick of the light, perhaps a reflection from a car window or some debris in the lot. But the tapping persisted, and the reflective dots stayed where they were. When morning came, we packed silently. The air had warmed a little, though the room still smelled of damp wood and the lingering bleach from the previous night. We didn't linger. At the desk, the old man was exactly the same, hunched and silent. He didn't look up as we handed him the keycards. The fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, and he muttered something that sounded like, "Safe travels." Though I'm not sure he even knew we were leaving. We didn't speak, didn't ask any questions. We walked back to our car and drove off, the parking lot slowly fading behind us, that flickering neon sign the last thing in the rearview mirror. Even now, I think about that night, the shadow, the tapping, the eyes in the corner. I've tried to rationalize it all, rats, building acoustics, reflections, but nothing lines up perfectly. Nothing explains the way it felt to be watched, the weight of silence in that room, the precise rhythm of something moving just out of reach. The motel looked normal enough in daylight, but in that room, in the dead of night, everything was wrong. We never returned. Every time I pass that stretch of highway, I drive past quickly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. I think about the way the old man never spoke, the way the building seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I think about the tapping, precise and deliberate, and the small reflective dots that stared down from the corner of the ceiling. That motel was just a building, old and neglected. Yet in those hours between 1 and 3 in the morning, it felt alive, aware, and far too attentive to be comfortable. It taught me something I can't quite explain. Sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural. They are patience, precision, and observation. The things that wait silently, invisible until you notice, and then only just enough to make you question everything. That night, we left alive, but the memory is sharper than any wound. It lingers because whatever it was, it didn't need to move or speak to feel present. It only needed to watch, and for 3 hours it did. I was already tired when I pulled off the highway, the kind of tired that makes bad choices feel reasonable. The motel sat back from the road behind a row of dead shrubs. Its fluorescent sign buzzed and flickered, throwing pale light across cracked asphalt. Several letters were burned out, but the word vacancy was still readable. The building looked old, not charming old, just worn down and left behind. The walls were spidered with cracks that had been painted over more than once. The place smelled like damp concrete even from the parking lot. I parked close to my room because the lot lights barely worked. The air felt heavy, like it had been holding moisture all day. When I unlocked the door, it stuck for a second, then gave way with a dull scrape. Inside, the room was small and dim. A single lamp cast a yellow circle over the bed. The smell hit me right away, mildew mixed with old cleaner. It wasn't strong enough to make me leave. It felt like most cheap motels I had stayed in over the years. I dropped my bag on the chair and took off my shoes. The moment my feet touched the carpet, I felt it. The fibers gave way under my weight. The floor felt soft and cold, like a soaked sponge. I shifted my foot and felt water move beneath the carpet. My socks darkened almost instantly. I knelt down and pressed my palm into it. Moisture rose around my fingers. The water was dark, not clear, and it smelled stale. I stood up and checked the bathroom, expecting an overflowing toilet or a broken pipe. Everything looked dry. The sink worked. The tub was empty. There were no obvious leaks. The ceiling above the wet area was stained, long brown streaks that looked old. Whatever soaked the carpet had been there for a while. I told myself it was just a plumbing issue from another room. I laid my shoes on the dresser and stayed on the dry strip near the bed. I turned on the television for background noise. The picture flickered, then settled. The sound came through thin and warped. I sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled my phone, but the battery icon was red. I plugged it into the wall, but the outlet was loose. The charger slipped out unless I held it in place. After a few minutes, the screen went black. The phone died completely. The room felt quieter after that. Not silent, but closed in. The hum of the sign outside leaked through the wall. Somewhere deeper in the building, a fan rattled. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The stains above the carpet looked darker in the low light. I tried to relax, but the smell kept catching in my throat. Around midnight, the building shifted. Pipes knocked inside the walls, sharp at first, then slow and uneven. The sounds moved from one side of the room to the other. I had heard old plumbing before, but this felt closer, like the walls were hollow and thin. I rolled onto my side and pressed my ear into the pillow. Then I noticed the other sound. It was low and uneven, like air moving through something narrow. At first I thought it was wind pushing through cracks. It rose and fell, almost patterned. It seemed to come from the wall behind the headboard. I sat up and leaned closer. The sound had a rhythm that didn't match the pipes, carried a shape that felt intentional. My skin tightened. I backed away from the wall and stood up. The carpet squelched under my heel. The sound continued, steady now, layered under the groans of the plumbing. I checked the door, then the window. Both were locked. The window faced the back of the building, where another wall stood only a few feet away. No breeze came through. I pressed my ear to the wall. The surface felt cool and slightly damp. The sound was clearer there, not loud, but persistent. It reminded me of someone speaking through a vent or a thin barrier, breath catching between phrases. I couldn't make out words, but the tone carried urgency. It made my chest feel tight, like my body understood something my mind didn't. I tried to shout, but my throat locked. No sound came out. I stood there, breathing shallow, listening. The pipes kicked again, louder this time, then quieted. The whispering sound stayed. It seemed to travel along the wall, then return to the same spot. My heart hammered hard enough to make my vision blur. I grabbed the television and dragged it toward the wall. Water seeped through the carpet with each step. I tipped the set off the stand and let it crash onto the floor. The impact shook the room. The screen shattered. I lifted it and slammed it against the wall behind the bed. Dust fell from the ceiling. The sound cut off immediately. The pipes fell silent too, as if the building had paused. I stood there shaking, waiting. The room smelled sharper now, like wet drywall and rust. I didn't hear anything else for several minutes. I backed away and sat on the bed, keeping my eyes on the wall. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. I stayed awake, listening to every shift of the building, every distant sound. The whispering never returned, but sleep didn't come either. My clothes felt damp from the air. My suitcase sat on the floor, its bottom soaking up water. By the time the clock on the television blinked to 4 in the morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled on my shoes, packed what I could, and lifted the bag. Water dripped from the fabric. The hallway outside was narrow and dim. One light flickered near the stairwell, buzzing in short bursts. The carpet out there was dry, but the walls showed the same stains I had seen in my room. As I walked, the building made low sounds, not pipes this time, but something like air pressure shifting through empty spaces. The exit door stuck, then opened with a loud creak. The parking lot was empty. The sign still buzzed above me. I loaded my bag into the car and sat behind the wheel for a long time before starting the engine. My hands shook as I drove away. I didn't look back. Later that day, after some sleep at a rest stop, I searched for the motel online, took some digging. The listing I booked through didn't match the address anymore. Old reviews came up from years back. People mentioned flooding, mold, and squatters. Someone posted photos of gutted rooms and broken walls. Another review explained that the place had been shut down after a fire in the maintenance area. It had been abandoned, then briefly reopened under different names, never fixed properly. One comment stood out. It mentioned hidden speakers and old intercom wiring used years ago when the motel housed seasonal workers. The system had been left in the walls. With moisture and damaged insulation, sounds carried in strange ways, echoing through cavities. Waterlogged carpet and mold made the walls soft. Pipes knocked against loose framing. Air moving through broken ducts created human-like tones. Reading that didn't make me feel better. It made everything line up too cleanly. The soaked floor came from a slow leak above my room that had been ignored for years. The smell came from rot-sealed under carpet. The sounds came from a building falling apart, amplifying itself through decay. There was no mystery left, just neglect and time. I threw away the suitcase when I got home. The smell never came out. Even now, I think about how easily I stayed, how close I came to sleeping through it all. The motel wasn't alive, but it wasn't empty either. It was a place that should have been closed, left to collapse in silence, not rented out to people passing through. I learned how thin the line is between cheap shelter and real danger, and how some places don't need anything unreal to feel wrong. The heat had been building all day, the kind that sinks into the skin and refuses to let go after sunset. When we pulled into the motel parking lot, the air felt thick and unmoving. The building sat low and stretched out, one long row of rooms with a second level stacked on top. Several hallway lights were out, leaving long shadows between the doors. The asphalt was cracked and dusty, marked with old oil stains that never faded. There was no pool, no vending machines that worked, and no visible office staff when we arrived. It felt like a place designed to be passed through without memory. Inside the room, the air was stale and warm. The air conditioner rattled when switched on, then went silent. No cool air followed. The curtains were thin and smelled faintly of smoke and sun-baked fabric. The carpet was worn flat from years of shoes and luggage. I dropped my bag and stood still, already sweating. The heat pressed in from all sides, trapped by walls that held the day's temperature like bricks in an oven. We cracked the door for a minute, hoping for a breeze, but the hallway air was no better, carried the smell of dust and old paint. By the time it was fully dark outside, the room felt smaller, like the heat had reduced the space. Around 11, my friend decided to walk across the road to a gas station for snacks and drinks. I stayed behind, stretched out on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan that barely turned. The parking lot outside was quiet, but not empty. A few cars sat scattered near other rooms, their windows dark. I could hear traffic from the highway in the distance, a steady low sound that never stopped. The hallway light outside our window flickered now and then, buzzing softly. I watched shadows move across the curtain as people passed, though none stopped near our room. After some time, I heard footsteps outside, close to the window. At first, I thought it was my friend returning early. The steps slowed near our car. Then they continued past, circled around, and came back again. The sound was deliberate, measured, not rushed, not wandering. I sat up and listened. The steps repeated the same path, gravel shifting under shoes, stopping near the front of the car each time. I leaned forward and pulled the curtain back just enough to see through the gap. The lot light reflected off the hood of our car. Standing near the driver's side was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, taller than my friend, with broad shoulders that filled out his shirt. His skin looked pale under the yellow light, almost washed out. He stood completely still, facing the window, his head slightly tilted upward. His arms hung loose at his sides. I raised my hand in a small wave, more out of confusion than greeting. He didn't respond. He didn't move at all. His face stayed fixed, eyes open and focused on the room. I waited for a blink, a shift of weight, some sign that he had noticed me. Nothing changed. The air felt heavier as I watched him. My chest tightened without warning. I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the window. The room felt even warmer now. I wiped sweat from my neck and glanced at the door, then back at the window. The footsteps stopped. Silence settled over the lot again, broken only by distant traffic. A few minutes later, headlights swept across the room as my friend pulled back into the space. Relief hit me fast and sharp. By the time my friend walked in, the man outside was gone. The car was untouched. The lot looked empty again, just faded lines and scattered vehicles under buzzing lights. I felt foolish standing there tense and alert, like I had imagined the whole thing. The heat, the stillness, the late hour all worked together to make small things feel bigger. The night dragged on. The air conditioner never kicked back in. We lay on the beds with the lights off, trying to sleep. Around 1 in the morning, a soft sound came from the window. It was faint at first, almost lost under the hum of the hallway light. A light tapping, steady and controlled. Not random, not wind. Each tap landed in the same spot. I sat up slowly, heart already racing. The tapping continued. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. I reached for the lamp and switched it on. The room filled with dull yellow light. The tapping stopped instantly. I crossed the room and pulled the curtain back all the way. The man stood there again, closer this time. His face was just outside the glass. The pale skin looked smoother in the light, stretched tight over sharp features. His eyes were open wide, reflecting the lamp. His hand hovered inches from the window, fingers slightly curled as if caught mid-motion. The moment the light hit him, he stepped back, turned, and walked away without haste, disappearing into the shadows between rooms. I locked the door and checked the window latch. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain closed. Sleep was no longer an option. Every sound felt sharp and immediate. Footsteps echoed in the distance, though none came close again. The hallway light buzzed and flickered, casting moving lines under the door. At first light, the heat eased slightly, replaced by a weak breeze that slipped through cracks in the building. We packed quickly and left without waiting for the office to open. The parking lot looked ordinary in daylight. No sign of the man, no marks near the window, no damage to the car. The motel looked tired and neglected, not threatening, just worn thin. Later that day, curiosity pushed me to look up the place. The motel had changed names several times over the years. Reviews painted a clear picture. Break-ins, people sleeping in stairwells, reports of someone watching rooms at night. Guests mentioned cars being checked, windows tapped, doors tested. Some said police were called more than once, but no one was ever found when they arrived. The area behind the motel backed onto an empty lot and a stretch of brush that led toward the highway, offering easy escape. It made sense in a way that didn't comfort me. The man wasn't unreal. He wasn't watching for no reason. He was waiting, measuring reactions, seeing which rooms were empty, which doors were unlocked, which guests were asleep. The stillness, the lack of response, the way he vanished the moment the light came on all pointed to someone experienced at staying unseen. The motel stayed open because it cost little to run and served people too tired or desperate to look elsewhere. The broken air conditioning, the half-lit hallways, the lack of staff all created conditions where someone could move freely without notice. The heat kept windows open. The darkness hid movement. No one stayed alert for long. I still think about how close he stood to the glass, how little effort it took for him to disappear. Nothing dramatic happened, but the intent was clear enough. The fear came from understanding what could have followed if timing or chance had shifted slightly. We left intact, not because the place was safe, but because the opportunity passed.